Okay, we're going to get into it. I'm going to start with, I am not a neuroscientist at all, but, I'm going to move this because I'm clumsy too. But I believe, and I'm willing to be challenged on this, but I believe that as practitioners of Torah, we have to know a lot of different things because those different things make Torah make sense. And so we're called to a really great call. And as we're learning, we don't always have the context for things because some of us are sometimes scared to read extra biblical books. And what I mean by extra biblical is not like extra biblical, like other things written about the Bible, but I mean like books that are not biblical. It's like I can spend that time reading my Bible. One of the things that happens when you read is it gives you language for other things. So you don't know that certain things exist. So people might say, well, where is that in the Bible? And I'm like, well, it doesn't say that. Exactly. But it is there. And the people before us, the Pauls, the Peters, the prophets, the kings, they understood Torah as a whole. And so they understood it because that was their learning. In our culture, we specialize in things, and you might only focus on neuroscience. And if you ask a person in neuroscience about something about podiatry, they might be like, yeah, that's not my wheelhouse. Where when Torah was practiced as a child, you were opened up to the fullness of the whole world. The whole world was your oyster. You learned about science and math and agriculture, and you got to choose a path that fit within that. So that's why you had people who practiced medicine and were lawyers because they studied the law and they were able to converse with kings. We were consulted as a people about all things within all nations. They say, hey, bring those Hebrew Israelite guys in. They are coming over from Judah and from Israel, and they've been taken captive by the Sumerians and the Assyrians, but they have some things that we need to know. And so when you read through the Bible and you look at the Israelite culture, they were literally the consultation for kings. They needed them on board so that their nation didn't rebel against them. You have people saying, oh, king, live forever, but we can't roll with that. And he's like, yeah, I know, sorry. We had to work that out with these guys so you don't have to go into this pit. But you know what? I think your God has you, right? Right? Like this. They reference them, but they're like, but I am king, and if I let you slide, I have to let everybody slide. So, but you had that. You had Daniel in Babylon. You had people, Joseph literally saved what was known, the whole known world by the wisdom that Yah gave him that nobody else had. And so when you're thinking about these things that we don't really have context for in our culture anymore, they're still there. And when each of you step into spaces, because sometimes we feel like we have to not be in spaces because like, that's not a Torah space. And I'm like, well then who are their consultation? Who are their people next to them, their advisors, when they make decisions that affect all of us either way? And when we speak Torah without having to say, and this verse is why you have to do it, and you're like, no, this makes sense because it's the teaching. And I can say it in a context in my field that makes sense, and in Charlie's field in medicine that makes sense, and all over. It makes people go, how'd you get so wise? Let me get to that verse. And it says, Psalm 119 says, because Torah made me wiser than my teachers. Because I can understand things and I think about them in a whole frame. So not a neuroscientist, but we're going to dabble in some neuroscience so that we have a better context. Yeah. So we have a better context. Move this way. Oh, you guys can see. Okay. I'm like, why am I moving? What did I do? I'm like, okay, I'm just going to move and go with it. Okay, so just a brief definition of neuroscience, and we're going to see how Torah ties in, and you'll see what I mean. And when I'm talking about Torah, I'm talking about the teachings. We covered that, right? It's the teachings. It's what we know. It's certain things. There's a knowing. Does anybody sometimes have a knowing about something as you read Torah? You're like, I know it's there. Just can't put my finger on it. This is kind of that thing. Neuroscience is a neural science, and it studies the nervous system, its development, and its structure. That is the basic biological part of who we are as people. It's the great equalizer, right? We all are wired the same way. the way we are stimulated, the way we respond, the way we think, the way we pick up things in the environment and how we react to them are similar. If you have good nurturing parents, guess what? You'll be a nurturer, right? If you have people who are angry, you could be very, very reserved. You're going to respond the same because your natural biological responses are wired that way. So neuroscience is focused on the brain, okay, kind of how this is going, and its impact on our behavior and cognitive function. And looks at the systems, specifically our nervous system, and how people with certain neurological or neurodevelopmental, it's a mouthful, neurodevelopmental issues, how they respond to their environment. I was reading a book called The Biology of Belief, and it's on a scientist, he's a cellular biologist, and how he found God through cellular biology. And it was so interesting because he said he focused on single cell biology, and he was called a crazy person for a really long time because he said single cells have their own community and they respond to the environment and they affect the other cells in the community. And I'm sitting there like, yeah, I'll get you believing, right? Because he's one cell talking to another cell, and one neuron communicating with another neuron is creating this great network of response. And he's watching it and he's like, the biology of one cell caused me to believe. Neuroscientists are looking at how behaviors and patterns exist in society. And as Torah practitioners, we actually are doing the work of neuroscientists. How we respond to Torah, how we behave in response to the things that we're doing, drive our whole structural network. It's pretty cool. So that's just a brief on neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist. Torah. So what's the importance of Torah and neuroscience? Neuroscience says that this is how the human brain develops. So you have neural connections for different functions and they develop sequentially. And so when you start off, when you're in utero, you go through this curve and you have all these neurons developing and you have sensory pathways and hearing and language being developed. And what tends to happen, you guys have heard this, how the first 5 years are the most important. We hear that over and over again. I'm a why person. Why are the first 5 years so important? Well, there are literally millions of neurons happening per second. Every time a child does something, I'm in child development education, so I'm gonna like nerd out on you guys. When they discover something and they pick it up and they do this thing and they're like, there is like, if you could light up their brain is going crazy. And then they take it and their hands are like, and then it gets into their mouth and then their brains go crazy. And all these things, and then don't let it be food, and then they're like, and it happens over and over again. And as you watch them, I worked in the pre-K sector for a really long time. You watch them and we would create these areas in the room where they could walk up and touch things, and they would touch something that was squishy. And we had a baby and we put her on the grass for the first time, and she picked up her feet like this, like, what is this? Like, and they look at you and they're like, do I cry? And you're like, no, it's okay. And you're talking and you're literally teaching the nervous system how to respond to new stimuli. Yeah. When a baby cries and they're hungry and you respond and feed them, we teach trust. There's all of these things that are happening. In those first 5 years, it's very, very high. And then what happens over time is that development starts to slow down through a process called pruning. What you don't use or what we don't reinforce, it begins to just kind of fall off. And so you can learn new things, but if you don't put them into practice, and we all know that, then your brain says, was that really important? I need space for the things that, like survival, like, you don't want to stumble and you're a little off balance. I'm going to throw that away and I'm going to keep that thing in place. And so it begins to die off. But the difference that we have when it comes to Torah is that something happens, and I think all of us in this space have experienced it, that where you thought your development had went off, there was a spike that happened, and you were able to take in new things and learn new things and wrestle with new things, whether it was language or understanding in a new way. And I believe that's part of Yah giving us a new heart. We'll talk about the heart in a second. A new heart to understand his word and what he's doing. And we're experiencing something that we probably can't even quantify or even explain to people It's like, I don't know what this is, but I feel new. And I feel different. And we have this childlike brain, and we're relearning trust. And we're relearning shame and guilt and what that looks like. And we really need safe places to practice that. Yeah, I noticed that. So the brain functions in a whole bunch of lobes. And the only reason I'm doing this is really for a punchline. So if it's like, she's going over my head, I'm going over my own head. So the brain has all these functions, right? You have the occipital lobe, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and they do all these different functions. So you have the parietal lobe, and it's touch, taste, smells, facial perception, visual perception, academic skills, mathematics, frontal lobe, problem solving, judgment, inhibition, personality, emotional traits, language production, motor planning. Temporal lobe, understanding language, organization, sequence, information retrieval, musical awareness, memory. How many people could label all the parts of their brain? Probably like 5 of us in here, all you people who are either in psychology, you're like, I got this. For the average person in here, we don't even know the brain that's in our own head. Tell me the sections of your hand. Yah goes as far as to say, I know every hair on your head. And if Yah wrote the Bible like this, how many people would be willing to read it? None of us. And so people sometimes complain about how Yah does things or how he structured things, but as I start diving into things that are above my pay grade, I realize how kind Yah is for breaking things down and making them really simple, right? Because I don't know all these functions that just my brain does, and that's just parts of your brain. That's not what different cells do, and you have glia, and you have all these different things doing all this cool stuff. I don't know what those things are. But then the God of those things tells you what to do and what not to do with this brain. And then we say, what do you know? He goes, let me just slide you an academic journal, and then we'll see what I know and what you know. You go ahead and read the abstract of it, and then stumble over the words, and then come back. That was what he pulled on, on Job. Like, what do you know? What do you know? All right, so Yah understands all of this. But he makes it really, really simple. I'm going to come back to this slide. He makes it really, really simple for us. When a lot of people think about the brain, they think about your head, right? When you think about the heart, you think about the blood pumping vessel in your chest. But when it comes to scripture, we have two things. We have emotions, and that's actually located in two places, your bowels. Have you ever had something that really made your stomach turn? It sounded really bad, and then it takes away your appetite. Stomach feels like it's knots, right? There's that area. And then you have this area of yearning and emotion called the kala. You might call it keliot. And it's actually the kidneys. It's the location where your kidneys are. That's how the Hebrews would have understood it in their context. They would name those things based on what they felt in those regions. And so that was considered the seat of the emotion. So when we're thinking about how we feel, it's not here, and it's not here. But when we're thinking about the brain is here, and inside of your brain you have a mind. And I'm going to show you, it's very interesting how Torah does it. So I said, now we have language, and when we read stuff, you're going to go, it's been there the whole time. The mind, or the inner self, is the lev, and it's your authority within. It's the thing that talks to you. We are all crazy, and we all talk to ourselves. Just admit it. Embrace it. We're doing it right now. You're like, I'm talking, stop talking. You have this inner voice. Sometimes your inner voice can be your own voice. That inner voice can be someone else's voice, but each of us have an inner voice that operates in our mind. And oftentimes we might hear it in our own voice. Sometimes we might hear it in another voice. Like when I get dressed in the morning, my mom says, are you gonna wear that? She would say, that looks frumpy. And I would go back and I'd be like, yeah, I might need to iron that. Yeah, let me go back. Or when you hear somebody else, or when you're in a moment of distress and you hear a voice say, it's okay. And it's connecting to somebody who taught you that. You embrace that voice and it holds in a place that you can then retrieve it in those moments of distress. It also works in the negative though. When we negative self-talk or self-doubt, it's developed from a place where somebody put that there and then we're reinforcing those things. Yah knew that. And so he calls the heart, and most of the time, I wouldn't say every time because of English, most of the time when you see the heart in the passage, it's either dealing with your emotions, which he says we need to grab the reins of those things, or your heart, which is the authority within. That's that thing that literally is driving how you think about things. And we'll talk about a little bit about thinking. It's called metacognition. You gotta think about what you think. That's in Torah too. All right, so that's your mind or your inner self. Yah says that he wants control of your inner self. He wants your inner self voice to be his voice. So when you think about things, you say, I'm not beautiful and I can't do this. He goes, you are supposed to respond to yourself and say, no, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. That's what he says. And what he says is true over what anybody else told you, even if in the moment that thing may have been true, you're not the sum of the things you've done. Because your brain, your mind is wired to change. It's wired to change. We go through developmental stages. We'll get to that in a second. So here are some verses where people talk to themselves, or Yah has talked, or their mind is working. So Genesis 6:5. Yah saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. So that doesn't mean that your blood vessel was thinking. That means that your mind was thinking. The thoughts of their, and it translates heart, the thoughts of their authority within was inclined toward dysfunction. They had a dysfunctionally functioning mind. So a neuroscientist would say, well, what kind of thing did they experience that caused their behavior, caused their cognition to operate in a way that now goes against what they were originally inclined to do? And they would go and do all this cool stuff. Yeah, I was like, their mind's messed up. It's dysfunctional. What is dysfunction to him? Anything that does not produce the call that we all have to be image bearers of him. If it goes against what he set up, if it's not breeding growth and development and new experiences, if it keeps us away from those things, it's dysfunctional. Yah literally puts Adam in a garden with boundaries. And the boundaries were not to keep him from doing things. He said, hey, go do a lot of stuff. Get those neurons firing like crazy, but don't do this and don't do this. You know why? Because it's going to stop that process from happening. Now you're going to be doing things and behaving in ways that prune away all the goodness and don't leave room for that. They're going to make you have to try to earn that back, and that's hard. Anybody know you mess up your brain? It's very difficult to restore that thing. It takes a lot of work. All right, Genesis 17:17. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said, so his mind's talking, said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old, and will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Nobody thinks that he's talking in his head. We just oh, he said to himself. It's no, his mind is thinking something about what's happening, and scripture records it. It's very interesting. 1 Samuel 2:1. Then Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoiced. Oh, no, is it this one? No, we gotta go back. Samuel 2, I think it's 1:1. I gave her the wrong verse. But that's how we have logos. So we just switch screens. All right, 1 Samuel, and it's the beginning. I just happen to have this window open. Great. Okay, 1 Samuel 1:13. It's small, so you probably won't be able to see it, but it's right here. Now, Hannah had been speaking in her heart. She's talking to herself in her head. But we all do this. Watch this. Her lips were moving. But her voice could not be heard. So Eli said, she's drunk. Right? But we do it. Have you ever thought you said something to somebody because you thought it so loud in your head? And you go, why didn't you go grab me X, Y, and Z? And they're like, you didn't ask me to. You're like, man, I must have thought that really loud. We have an internal experience happening in our minds. And Yah is literally highlighting this throughout the scripture. A lot of us feel like we're crazy sometimes. We're Googling, can I hear myself talk to myself? And Yah's like, it's right there in the text. Hannah was sitting there and she was praying and she's like, and we do it. Some people actually, I've noticed people do this when they're talking, when you're talking to them, their lips move because they're actually, that's how they track what you're saying. Right? It happens all the time. Once you notice, you're like, your mind is going 1,000,000 miles a minute. They're engaged. And if you don't know that, you can get frustrated, like, why are you doing that while I'm talking? I'm trying to track. I'm trying to keep up with you. So those are just a couple of examples so that you understand that literally that's happening. It's recorded in the text. But if we don't have the language to see it, then we wouldn't know what was happening. We wouldn't know what's happening there. So this is interesting, the mind and how it's structured. So we know that there's mind. We know it exists. We know that it thinks thoughts. We know that it takes in stimuli. We know that it has all these areas that are functioning. But what's really interesting is that when it comes to doing the work of creating a safe space to exist in your own body, that can be difficult. Because there's a lot of things that are happening before you even understand that you are a self. You know that happens? Have you ever seen a baby see themselves for the first time? Oh my gosh, it's the cutest thing ever. So there's a YouTube video. I've seen it in person. We put mirrors at floor length in the daycares so they can come up. I see Lori, where are you? Yes, right. She taught me everything I know about this. So we put mirrors so that they can see themselves. And it's the coolest thing. Because at first they're like, it's a baby. And they're like, you're like, yeah. And they're looking at the baby. And then they get to a certain age. And they walk by. And they go. And you know it. They're like, that baby is me. There was a video on, I think it was like YouTube or TikTok or something. And this little girl, she goes, that baby's pretty. And her daddy goes, you think she's pretty? And she goes, yeah, she's pretty. He goes, I think she's pretty too. And her daddy goes, that's you. And she said, I'm pretty? And I was like, oh, and just that positive, she will never not feel beautiful ever again. When she walks in the mirror, she's like, I'm pretty. That's the importance of development that happens in the home. We also develop our faith in our homes. So a lot of things that we're frustrated with when we come into this walk and we enter into things is because we were taught those things by people we trust. Very early on, we were taught who to trust, what was good, what was bad, what was up, what was down, if we're beautiful, if we're not. And when we come to things that challenge that, the hardest part about it is that we have to challenge people we love deeply. And a lot of times the frustration we have in our faith and in this walk is that we have to deal with people that we haven't really gathered the language for to actually dispute those thoughts, because we weren't taught to dispute them. We were taught to trust them blindly. And they walked us into systems of belief, and we were taught to trust that blindly. And then we finally wake up and our whole world starts to fall apart because they didn't have something right. And if our caregivers and the people that we think are so much smarter than us and all these things didn't have it right, the world feels like it shatters all at one time. All at one time. I don't know how people in here feel, and it's not to say go read this or read that, but I'll just say, as a historical or even just a folkloric account, depending on how you view it, I don't have a dog in that fight at all. Abraham is said to, in additional thought, have been in a house full of idols. And his father Terah had this house of idols. And Abraham begins searching for God. He looks at the sun, he looks at all these things, and he's like, that's not quite it. It's not what I'm searching for. And he gets all, serious about it and just destroys his father's idols. The reason why I'm telling this is because what happens next seems to fit if you want to make it a midrash, or if you want to use your sanctified imagination for why God came to Abraham and was like, go. Right? He was going to die. That's what the story was, that he was literally like, you're going to die. You're destroying the idols of this nation. The father of the faithful, and this is how I leave with people. If you ever want to have a conversation with somebody who's not quite there yet, everybody agrees that Abraham is the father of the faithful. Not going to get a disagreement. And the father of the faithful had to fight against paganism. That's the inception of what we believe. And so that's the responsibility, because if God saw him and said, that guy right there, he listened to me, he obeyed me, and it didn't make sense to his family or anybody else, we're all called to be loners. We're all called to that. And people go, I never thought about that. Yes, set apart, peculiar, doesn't always look good. So we're going to look at Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. And Yah said to Abram at the time, he said, really, lech lecha. It says it literally means go for you, or in a better way, and Estelle says, I'm going to show you guys what Estelle is going to do. Estelle says, go inward. Go inward. It's an inward dismantling. It's a call to inwardly dismantle the things that have been structured in his brain and the way he thinks. Yah said to Abram, go from your country. When we're born into a particular place. And that place often shapes what we believe. So we were born into a Bible-believing nation. So for many of us, it's not a hard hurdle to cross to accept that, because you've had that ingrained, even though you didn't know it, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in the practices. It's in the setting up for Christmas and other things. Even though it doesn't have a proper context, you're being fed this before you even have ability to make a decision about it. So it feels comfortable. So he's saying that country you're in and the way that they think, leave that. For many of us, we're like, I can do that. I can be an expat. No problem. No problem. Then he says, and I'm going to just say go afterwards, go from your people. That gets a little difficult. He says there's structures that have been set up because of the people that you are. I need you to leave that too, because that's not me either. So some of us are pigeonholed to, well, my people believe and my people thinking. I was like, I'm going to call you out of that too. This part's the hard part, though. He says, go from your father's house. See, you can leave your country. You can even leave your people. But your father/mother's house goes with you everywhere you go. That was not going to be easy. Now, when you watch Abraham's journey, you're like, I didn't know Yah was putting me all in Abram's mind. When he does things and when he behaves a way, Yah's patient with him because he has behavior that is literally neurologically wired because of his country, because of his people, and because of his father's house. So at moments we're like, Abraham doubted, why did he do that? And Yah's like, it's okay. It's his country. It's his people. It's his father's house that are operating as his authority within. And I am re-nurturing this old man, essentially. I'm taking him and I'm making him a child again. I'm stripping him of everything and literally rebirthing him and starting him at the very beginning developmental stages. Very first thing that Abraham has to struggle with is early childhood. Is infancy, trust and mistrust. This is Erickson's model, right? Talking about how the brain, cognitive development starts right there, trust and mistrust. I know Yah told me to leave, but now I'm forced to trust him. It took almost 3 times for Abram to actually trust. And the first time that he didn't do it right, Yah would say, you know what, I'm done with you, dude. Your brain's all messed up. You're never gonna get this. It's like, no, he understood that it was biological. And he literally takes him back to infancy and he puts him in positions where he has to learn to trust Yah, and it's rewiring and restructuring his brain. And so we talked about yesterday how at the end, I'm gonna fast forward, I'll come back to this, that Abram saw a consistency in who Yah was. He was refathered and remothered and reparented on a biological level by Yah. This is really important because when we're dealing with people who come into Torah, they don't come in here and over here as adults. When Yah gets us all, we start off right back at square one. He's like, I'm your father, we're starting at infancy. Guess who understood that? Paul. He was like, I'm giving you milk, but eventually you gotta eat food. He understood developmental stages. The great practitioners of Torah understood that it was a holistic understanding and a holistic teaching. And he was literally brought back to the beginning, trust and mistrust. How many of us have to admit, I'm still kind of there? It's me. I'm putting my hand up. I was floored. I was like, I had to come all the way back to trust and mistrust. And I'm learning, and I'm like, okay, so what happens is we all develop throughout life. We develop at different areas, and when we get to certain areas, what happens is, depending on how you're impacted at that area, you learn valuable lessons. It is never 100%. This idea of perfection that we have is not only not biblical, it's not biological either. The brain only needs a little bit of something good and a little bit of something functional to build pathways. It doesn't have to be all the way that way. Sometimes it's good to have a little bit of both and knowledge of both so you know the difference. So you don't do certain things. You're like, oh, I know how that feels, I want to do that, right? Yah knows that. So at each stage, it is the parent's job to then allow the practice of these things. If that's true, and if you agree that that's true, I am challenging you to dismantle your shame and guilt for the stuff you're not getting right now in Torah. You have to practice. If it wasn't about practice, you would find out this information and be caught up to the Father like Enoch or Elijah, right? That's not it. He's like, now that you know it's me and you, we got to work through these stages. And perfection, being made perfect, is not about doing it without error, because it's the error that teaches you the development. So Yah can't be upset with error. What Yah is upset with is dysfunction and presumptuous sin. Presumptuous sin is like this. Sin is, how we would consider sin, is missing the mark. If the target is on that wall and I aim and shoot at it and I miss, are you all going to stone me? No. You're going to be like, she's not a good shot. Get one of the country girls in here to do it. Right? Or you might even have a person that is a good shot who says, hey, you know why you messed up? You took your eye off the bullseye. Focus, do like this, do this, adjust this, try it again. And I shoot again and I get closer and everybody in here erupts. Whoa, yes, good job. And then you go, okay, let's shoot again. And guess what? As I keep shooting over and over again and I practice, something's happening up here. And my brain is like, okay, my shoulder needs to be like this. And then it becomes second nature. And when I do it, then it gets better and better and I'm accurate. And you guys are like, man, I remember she couldn't shoot at all, right? Sin is missing the mark. It's not a thing that just ends the whole world. It's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to develop. It's an opportunity to strengthen a particular skill. Presumptuous sin is this is the target, and that's where I'm aiming. No matter how long I shoot that way, I'm never going to hit that target. And everybody's saying, hey, hold it, turn around, the target's behind you. I like that way. I want to shoot at that. And you're like, that's not going to develop anything. And you're like, so, I like it. And everybody here go, man, that's sad. And guess what my brain's going to do? Because it's biological, my brain's going to agree with me. That felt good to me. That felt good to me. That felt good to me. So then when I have to finally, if I'm forced, like he says, he calls the deer to clave, when he twists the oak, it makes me turn around. And I start this way, it's not going to feel good to me. And I'm going to keep wanting to turn around this way. That's where a lot of people are. They've been shooting that way for so long that actually turning around and doing something different is difficult biologically. It's not that they're just evil and they don't want to try. They're wired away. They're wired away. And so Yah has to do a rewiring, so he's trusting us to participate in the process of that rewiring. I don't know if I have this on a sheet, but I'm going to kind of skip to this one because I thought this was really cool. The brain has a place in it called, let me get my notes. I actually wrote this down. I didn't think I'd make it here, but yeah, it does a thing. Let's see, here we go. It has a thing in it called, and I hope I pronounced it right, it's called the glia. And so we've been talking about neurons and how those things kind of respond, things fire, your arms move and all this stuff happens. But a less talked about, but I think equally important part of the brain is the glia. And literally, they are a part of they're in the non-neuronal category of the cells, and they don't transmit electrical signals, but still form an important part of the nervous system. And the glial cells provide structure and other kinds of support to neurons to help ensure that neurons can function properly. So you have all this firing and growth, and then you have this area that provides structure. And so as I'm reading Torah and I'm looking at this, I'm like, so we're supposed to grow and develop, but just like children, just like everything else, our brain operates with boundaries. so they can function well. There are multiple types of glial cells, so there's glia, and they provide the central nervous system and immune defense against potential disease threats, and they also dispose of leftovers from cell injury and death. The other day I talked to you all, and I was reading through this, actually my lesson took a little turn, and I thought about the importance of sisterhood and the importance of mothering. When we think about what we do and the work that we do in this walk, the most important part of it is that we are actually providing space for people to be reparented by Yah. Not by us, by Yah. And Yah has a particular way he wants his baby treated at every developmental stage. If the neuroscientist knows, if Erickson knows that certain things are necessary at certain stages, how much more so does Yah know? So if he says at infant stage, it's from this many months to this many months, how dare we say at 6 months you need to be walking? How dare we say you should compare yourself to me, I'm 27, and you should have a full executive functioning happening, even though that doesn't happen until after 18 and sometimes longer. That's not fair. Because we look at one another in the physical. And Yah had to tell Samuel, one of our greatest prophets that I think ever lived, he goes, hey, man sees the outward. I see the heart. I see here. David thought a certain way and behaved a certain way. That's what made him attractive. And Yah was like, I see your mind. And you may be 40, 50, 60, 70 to everybody else, but to me, you're an infant. Behave accordingly. Walk through those stages and don't keep trying to get out of those stages too soon. And so I mentioned the glial because I'm like, while we all have our own development, we're supposed to be the structure, like Torah, that surrounds a person and makes it safe for them to grow and learn. We don't want to be the person that becomes the inner voice in somebody's head with all the crap and stuff we say to them. And then that overrides Yah's voice. That's a dangerous place to be in for Yah's baby. We don't want to take that on. And especially because people are already going through things and trying to come out of things, and then for them to fear and get shame and guilt. And as we look at that chart, how can they grow into functional adults when they don't have a safe place to practice in? Torah teaches us that we need higher thinking. And so I think I came in on your lesson right on time. Miss Charlie Brown. It's perfect. You said, you need to stop and think and work your way through. That's metacognition. That's Torah. Think about what you're thinking. You know what the scripture says? Take every thought captive. That's metacognition. Think about what you're thinking. Before you do anything, think about it. And before we engage, we have to say, man, these are people with minds, and they have full experiences, and they've been biologically wired a certain way. And they're coming here for the safety of the Father. He's taking them back to infancy. And I don't know any people in here who were like, hey, I don't want my baby to have that. Somebody said, no, give it to the baby anyways. Now I would start fighting. We love each other a lot, but there'd be a fight in here. Yah says it's better for you to put a millstone around your neck and to be cast into the deep than to make one of the little ones stumble. He's not talking about just kids. He's talking about us. We're all his children. He's saying, I'm trying to create a community and a safe space so that I can neurologically rewire my people so that they can experience my love and learn to trust me. You have to be that fence around them. I'm going to read something. I was actually going to read this the other day. And if you saw this book up there, that was the book. This is the one I'm going to read from. And I'll finish with this. I'll also preface with there's like some cultural African things in there. It's not supposed to be like some kind of weird spiritualism thing. It's just there. Okay? It's not like... So I put, my mind, along with my life, shattered into a million pieces. And I had to write myself back to safety. Grief carried me like a torrent wave into the depths of the ocean, and I had two choices, sink or swim. I chose the latter. I clawed through the salty water, fatigue and tiredness overtook my body. I'm gonna die out here. But then from the distance, I heard a faint chanting, a beckoning that vibrated deep within. The shore was lined with women in white, illuminated by the divine, welcoming me to safety. Their wails and moans, chantings and drum beats helped me to catch my rhythm. Flailing arms and uncoordinated legs caught the rhythm. I began to progress toward safety. The sound louder, and in that moment, I felt no more pain. I was being healed. When I arrived at the shore, they told me stories of how I was swept away and how they came together and formed a circle, and they told me that they prayed for me. They prayed that all that was heavy would drown at sea and that the tender portion would return. They formed a circle of women who had journeyed before me, those who had grieved love and youth, and they committed to being the mothers, aunties, and friends I would need as I rebuilt. As I lay collapsed on the shore, breathing beginning to slow down, I realized I'd entered the sacred womb of creation, a safe place. A divine feminine healing was about to take place. We don't know what people need to heal from. We don't know what they need from us. And so it's our responsibility individually and collectively to be well so that people can go through that process, not so we can manipulate the process. That was real. I really felt that. I wrote that in a really dark space. And I finally felt like I could breathe when I saw my sisters and my aunties and my friends arrive and say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay to not know. It's okay. We get it. And I'm talking about people who I serve with. You guys see them? This is not fake. They're not just serving me because they think I'm cool. We do this for each other wherever any of them go. I am in one of their seats sometime as well. And we make space to allow for the minds to heal. We've all gone through stuff and we're very transparent with each other. You know why? So when I see something on them or I see them slipping into depression or I see something happen, I call them, hey, what's going on? I see you and I see where Yah's taking you and I remind them, it's a journey. This is where you are. We were talking, can I share, this morning, and we're talking about just spiritual growth, and I said, sometimes I feel like I'm in the teenage phase where I'm like fighting for this autonomy, but it feels like I'm fighting my community more than I'm fighting Yah. And it disrupts that connection. And so I want us to think about that there are minds being reshaped. People didn't grow up knowing this. Even if they grew up knowing this, the people that taught them may have not been safe. And they're restructuring and they're regrowing in a way to find the Father. They're not finding us. We're not the stop.
Right.
You don't want to be the stop. That's an uncomfortable conversation to have when you meet the King. So, what happened with, you're like, I thought, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good. You get called front and center. And so I want us to think about that. I want us to think about our brains. I want us to be gentle with ourselves. How many of you have tried to learn something new? Man, we give up. The fact that people keep showing up and they haven't given up should be celebrated on this walk. That should be like, we should clap and rejoice every single time. Every single time we show up. Literally, when the camp set out, they would set out in order. And as they came in, I like to think, right? You had the different tribes that would come in, but the tribe that was given the occupation of praise and did war to, Judah would be the first one, and be probably singing. And as one tribe came in, the next tribe would join in on the singing. And if you're the last tribe that came in, you had a whole bunch of people swaying and singing and rocking. We all made it to the next stop. And then we get together, we refresh, and then we head out again when we get our deployment. That's where we need to be.